The reading of the will was held in the library, and I knew I was about to be erased. My brother Richard sat in our father's wingback chair, one leg crossed over the other, already wearing the gold watch that had been on Dad's wrist when he died. He didn't even have the decency to look sad. He looked victorious. Like he'd been waiting for this moment his entire life. Mr. Connolly, the family lawyer, adjusted his glasses and read the words that would change everything. To my son, Richard Road, Sterling, Montgomery 3. I leave the entirety of the Montgomery estate, including the main residence and all associated properties. I stopped listening after that. I didn't need to hear the rest. I already knew what was coming. $50,000 Rs. A consolation prize. A pat on the head for the daughter who had spent the last 2 years of her life dropping everything to come home, and CA for a dying man. Richard's wife Pamela was sitting in the corner, her legs crossed, her phone in her hand. She wasn't even pretending to pay attention. She knew exactly how this was going to go down. They'd talked about it. They'd planned for it. They'd probably already picked out which rooms to gut and which heirlooms to sell. I stood up before Mr. Connolly could finish his final sentence. I didn't need to hear our cash sum. I didn't need to hear 50,000. I didn't need to hear the pity in his voice when he said my name. I walked out of that library with my spine straight and my jaw locked. My heels clicked against the marble floor, and with every step, I could feel the house closing in around me. 28 rooms. 3 floors. A lifetime of memories. And none of it was mine. I spent the rest of the day packing. That's what you do when you've been erased. You gather the small things that belong to you and you put them in a suitcase and you try to pretend it doesn't feel like your heart is being ripped out of your chest. My room was small, tucked away in the east corner of the 2nd floor, with a dormer window that looked out at the Potomac. I'd slept in that room since I was 7 years old. It was the only place in the entire mansion that had ever felt like mine. Richard Road came up at some point. I didn't hear him knock. He just opened the door and stood there, filling the frame, his shoulders broad and his expression condescending. Leaving already? He asked. Not soon enough, I said. He smiled. It was the same smile he'd worn when we were kids and he'd taken my dolls and buried them in the backyard. The same smile he'd worn when he convinced our father that I'd broken the antique vase when it was actually him. The same smile that had gotten him everything he'd ever wanted and me nothing at all. You can keep the furniture, he said. I'm having the place redecorated anyway. Everything's going. All this old stuff. It's time for a fresh start. I didn't say anything. I just zipped my suitcase and walked past him. I didn't look back. I didn't want to give him the satisfaction of seeing me cry. But I didn't leave. I couldn't. Not yet. Something kept me there, some stubborn, angry part of me that refused to let him win without a fight. I told myself I was just too tired to drive. I told myself I'd leave in the morning. But the truth was simpler and harder. I wasn't done with this house yet. So I stayed in my room, listening to the sounds of the mansion settling around me. I heard Richard Road and Pamela downstairs, laughing, opening bottles of wine, making calls to contractors. I heard the words demo and modernize and get rid of all this junk. I pressed my palms against my ears and tried to drown them out. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my father's face in the hospital, his hand squeezing mine, his mouth trying to form words he couldn't speak. He'd tried to tell me something. I knew he had. But the oxygen mask made it impossible to hear. The doctors said he was just confused. The morphine was making him hallucinate. But I knew better. My father was never confused. He was a man of precision. Everything he did was deliberate, even at the end. I got up at 2 a.m. The house was quiet now, but not silent. It was never silent. There were always sounds in the Montgomery mansion, creaking pipes, shifting beams, the wind rattling the old windows. My mother used to call it the heartbeat of the house. She said the house was alive, that it remembered everything that had ever happened inside it. She died when I was 12, and I'd always thought she was being poetic. But now, walking the empty hallways in the dark, I root to wonder if she'd been telling the truth. I didn't plan to go to the sunroom. I wasn't even thinking about it. I was just walking, The way you do when you can't sleep and your mind won't stop spinning. I passed the library, where the door was still open, and I saw that Richard Road had already moved his things in. A leather briefcase on the desk. A bottle of scotch on the side table. He'd taken over in less than 12 hours. The audacity of it made me nauseous. So I turned left instead of right. I walked down the narrow hallway that led to the back of the house, past the old parlor that no one ever used, past the pantry with its dusty shelves, past the door that led to the basement staircase I'd never dared to climb down as a child. At the end of the hall was the sunroom. It was a strange room. Built during the Victorian era, when everyone wanted a glass-walled conservatory to show off their exotic plants. But the glass had long since been covered over with old shutters, and the plants had died, and the room had become a graveyard of forgotten things. Broken chairs. Old lamps. A stack of newspapers from the 1980s. I'd only been in there a handful of times in my entire life, and never at night. I opened the door and felt the cold. It was colder in the sunroom than in the rest of the house, like the heat just didn't want to stay there. I flicked the light switch, but nothing happened. The bulb was dead. So I pulled out my phone and used the flashlight. The beam swept across the room. Dust motes danced in the light. The floor was covered in a layer of grime, and the walls were stained with water damage. It was a forgotten room in a forgotten corner of a house that had already forgotten me. And then I heard it. A sound so faint I almost missed it. A scraping. A scuttling. Like something moving just beneath the floor. I froze. The flashlight beam stayed fixed on the spot where I'd heard the sound. There was nothing there. Just the dirty floorboards. Just the dust. But my heart was pounding now. My throat was dry. Every instinct told me to leave, to go back to my room, to pack my suitcase and drive away and never look back. But something else was pulling me four-way road, something older and more stubborn. I took a step. The floorboard groaned. I took another step. I heard the sound again. Not underneath me this time. In front of me. Near the FAR wall, where an old fern stand sat covered in cobwebs. I walked toward it. Slowly. Carefully. The flashlight beam shook with my trembling hand. I knelt down and swept the light across the floorboards. They looked like any other floorboards, old, warped, stained with age. But there was something about the pattern that didn't quite fit. A seam that didn't belong. A line that was too straight, too deliberate. I pressed my hand against it. The board shifted. Just slightly. Just enough to let me know that it wasn't nailed down. I looked around the room. There were no tools anywhere. Nothing I could use to pry it up. I thought about going back to the kitchen, finding something, anything. But I was afraid if I left, I'd lose my nerve. I'd come back to my senses. I'd realize how ridiculous this was. I'd pack my suitcase and leave and never know what was under that board, so I used my fingernails. I dug into the seam and pulled. It hurt. The wood was rough and splintered, and my fingers were soft from years of typing. But I kept pulling. I pulled until my nails were cracked and bleeding. I pulled until the board sta root to give. And then it lifted. I set it aside and sta read down into the dark space beneath. It was about a foot deep, no more. Just a gap between the floor and the subfloor, the kind of space where old houses collect dust and dead mice and secrets. But there was no dust in this space. There was a box. A tin box. Old. Rusted. The kind that used to hold Christmas kites or buttons or sewing supplies. It was covered in grime, but I could tell it had been placed there deliberately. It was perfectly centered. Perfectly aligned. My hands were shaking as I reached down and lifted it out. It was heavier than I expected. The metal was cold against my palms. I set it on the floor and tried to open it. The clasp was stuck. I had to pry it with my broken fingernails, and I heard it squeak like it had been waiting for someone to open it. The lid popped up. I held my phone over it and looked inside. And there it was. A map. Hand-drawn. Yellowed paper. Faded ink. I spread it out on the floor, and my heart stopped. I recognized the handwriting immediately. My father's. Shah RP, precise. The same handwriting that had written me notes in school, signed my report CARDS, left me instructions on how to pay the bills when he was too sick to get out of bed. The map showed the estate, the mansion, the river, the old CA Riage Road. Everything I knew. But it also showed something I'd never seen before. 3 X's marked in red ink. And under each X, written in my father's CA refill hand, the same 3 words. 3 oil rigs. I couldn't breathe. I sat back on my heels and STA read at the map, my mind racing, my pulse pounding in my EARS. I thought about the phone calls I'd overheard, the late-night meetings in my father's study, the way he'd talked about mineral rights and land deals, and something that was worth more than the house itself. I thought about the way he'd looked at me in those final weeks. The apology in his eyes. The regret. The desperate need to say something he couldn't quite get out. He'd hidden this map. He'd hidden it under a loose floorboard in a forgotten room in a mansion that was going to go to Richer Road. He'd hidden it because he knew. He knew Richer Road wouldn't look. He knew Richer Road was too arrogant, too blind, too busy planning his renovations to ever set foot in this decaying room. And he'd hidden it for me. I folded the map, pressed it to my chest, and listened to the house settle around me. Above me, somewhere in the West Wing, Richer Road was sleeping, dreaming of marbly countertops and wine cellar RS, thinking he'd won. He hadn't won. He'd taken the mansion. But that night, under the floorboard RDS of a dead woman's sunroom, I found the map. 3 oil rigs. The future, hidden in plain sight. And my brother didn't know a thing. I stayed in that sunroom until dawn. I stayed because I couldn't move. I stayed because my mind was reeling and my heart was pounding and my hands were still shaking. I stayed because I had to memorize every detail of that map, every line, every marque, every CA fully written word. And when the sun finally rose, streaming through the dirty shutters, I made a decision. I was going to fight for what was mine. I was going to use that map. I was going to find those rigs. And I was going to make my brother regret the day he thought he could steal my birthright and walk away cleaned. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the map. The 3 red X's. My father's handwriting. The words 3 oil rigs burned into my memory like a brand. I stayed in the sunroom until the first light crept through the dirty shutters. My fingers were still raw from prying up the floorboard RD, and my back ached from hunching over the map for hours. But I didn't see I had something now. Something Richer Road didn't know about. Something that might change everything. At 6 a.m, I heard footsteps in the hallway. Pamela's voice, high and nasal, complaining about the temperature. I folded the map, tucked it into the waistband of my jeans, and pulled my sweater down over it. I stood up just as the sunroom door swung open. Pamela stood there in her silk robe, her hair wrapped in a towel, her face twisted into a mask of surprise and annoyance. "Ellie, what are you doing in here? Looking for something," I said. My voice came out steadier than I expected. She squinted at me, suspicion flickering in her eyes. "Looking for what?" "There's nothing in this room but junk. Richer Road said we're gutting it next week." "I know," I said. "I was just saying goodbye." She didn't believe me. I could see it in the way she tilted her head, the way her lips pressed together. But she didn't push. She didn't see Avery enough to push. I was already a ghost to her, a remnant of the old house she was so eager to tear down. I walked past her, down the hallway, through the kitchen, and out the back door. I didn't stop until I reached my CAR. I didn't look back at the mansion. I couldn't. Not with the map pressed against my stomach, not with my heart pounding like a wah or drum in my chest. I drove to a motel 10 miles away. A cheap place with flickering neon and a clerk who didn't ask questions. I paid cash for 3 nights. I locked the door, drew the curtains, and spread the map out on the bed. I looked at it for a long time. The more I studied it, the more I realized my father had left me more than just a map. He'd left me a puzzle. The X's were marked in red ink, but they weren't obvious. They weren't centered on the property lines or placed near the river. They were hidden in plain sight, tucked into corners of the land that didn't seem to have any significance. The first X was near a creek that I remembered playing in as a child. The second was in a patch of woods that my father had always warned me to stay out of. The third was on the edge of a swamp that flooded every spring. None of them were on the mansion property itself. They were on parcels of land that my father had purchased decades ago and never developed. Land that Richa Road probably didn't even know existed. I needed to verify the map. I needed to know if these X's were real, if the oil rigs actually existed, or if my father had left me a wild goose chase as his final joke. He had a strange sense of humor, my father. He used to hide Easter eggs in impossible places and watch us see RCH for hours. But this didn't feel like a joke. This felt like a lifeline. The county clerk's office opened at 9. I was there at 8:30, standing outside with a cup of stale coffee and a burning impatience that made my skin crawl. When the doors opened, I was the first one through. The woman at the desk was named Marga Rhett. She'd been working at the county records office since before I was born, and she knew everyone in town. She recognized me right away. "Ellie Montgomery," she said, her eyes widening. "I heard about your father." "I'm so sorry." "Thank you, Marga Rhett," I said. "I need to pull some old deeds. Land records. My father's properties." She tilted her head. "You're not looking for the mansion. Richa Ardy's already been in here, claiming the whole estate. He was in here 2 days ago, transferring everything into his name." My stomach dropped. 2 days ago. Richa Road had been here 2 days ago, making sure every piece of my father's property was legally his. He hadn't wasted a single minute. He'd moved fast, faster than I'd expected. "I know," I said, keeping my voice level. "But there were some other parcels. Smaller ones. My father mentioned something about them before he died, and I wanted to check the records." Marga Rhett studied me for a moment, her eyes sharp and knowing. She'd seen enough family drama in this office to last 10 lifetimes. She knew when someone was hiding something. But she also knew Richa Road, and she knew the kind of man he was. I could see it in her face. She was on my side. "I can show you the deed books," she said. "But it might take a while. There's a lot of land in the Montgomery name." "I've got time," I said. "All the time in the world." She led me to the back room, a cramped space filled with filing cabinets and old leather-bound books. The smell of paper dust and must made me sneeze. She pulled out a stack of ledgers and pointed to a table. "These go back to 1950, she said. "If your father purchased land, it'll be in here." I thanked her and root flipping pages. It was tedious, painstaking work. I had to cross-reference names, dates, and property descriptions. But I was methodical. My father had taught me to be methodical. He'd spent years teaching me how to read through legalese, how to find what mattered, how to ignore the noise. 3 hours later, I found it. A deed dated. My father's name. A purchase of 3 parcels of land, totaling roughly 40 acres. The deed listed the locations. Each one matched the X's on my map. But there was something else. A note in the margin written in my father's hand. A single word. Mineral. I read at it. My pulse quickened. Mineral rights. That was the key. It didn't matter who owned the land. It mattered who owned what was under it. My father had bought the mineral rights separately. He'd made sure they weren't attached to the mansion property. He'd protected them. The map wasn't just a map. It was a treasure map. And the treasure was waiting for me, 40 acres and 3 rigs I just had to claim before my brother figured it out. I closed the ledger and checked the clock. Noon. I had to move fast. If Richa Road was already going through the records, it wouldn't take him long to realize there was land he hadn't claimed. He was arrogant, but he wasn't stupid. He would notice eventually. I drove to the first site. It was a 45-minute drive down a winding country road, past fields and barns and rusted mailboxes. The land was at the end of a dirt track, overgrown with weeds and brambles. I had to park my car on the side of the road and walk through the brush to get to the spot. It was exactly where the map said it would be. A small clearing near a creek, surrounded by oaks and sycamores. I stood in the middle of it, turned in a slow circle, and tried to imagine what was beneath my feet. Oil. Black gold. The kind of resource that could change everything. I didn't see any rigs. I hadn't expected to. The map was from decades ago, and the rigs had probably been torn down or abandoned. But the mineral rights were still there. The land was still there. And if I could prove ownership, I could restart the operations. I could tap into what my father had hidden. I spent the rest of the afternoon at the second and third sites. They were more difficult to reach, overgrown with vegetation and littered with fallen branches. The third site was especially tricky, bordered by a swamp that squelched under my boots. But I found each one. I marked them on my phone with GPS coordinates. I took photos of the Lanime RKS. I made notes. By sunset, I was exhausted. My feet were blistered. My arms were scratched from thorns. I smelled like mud and sweat and swamp water. But I was invigorated. I had something real. Something tangible. Something that could be built into a future. I went back to the motel, took a long shower, and sat on the bed with the map spread out before me. I called the number I'd found for Arthur Blakely, the attorney in Delaware. His office was closed, so I left a message. I didn't say much. Just that I was Eleanor Montgomery, and I needed to discuss my father's trust. Then I waited. The next morning, Arthur Blakely called me back at 7:30. His voice was old and papery, like crumbling parchment. "Eleanor," he said. "Your father told me you'd reach out. He said you'd have a map." My heart stopped. "You knew about the map?" "Of course I knew," he said. "I've been holding the documents for years. The trust is set up in your name, Eleanor. It always has been. The 3 parcels of land, the mineral rights, the leases, everything. It's all yours. It just needed you to claim it." I almost dropped the phone. My father, he planned all of this. "Your father was a very careful man," Arthur said. "He knew your brother would take the mansion. He knew Richard would be satisfied with the big house and the family name. So he made sure the real inheritance was hidden. He wanted to see if you would find it. He wanted to test me. He wanted to see if you had the initiative. The curiosity. The will. And you did, Eleanor. You found the map. You found the land. Now you need to act fast. Your brother is already looking into the properties. He doesn't know about the trust yet, but he will soon. You need to secure your claim before he catches up." I wanted to laugh, but I couldn't. The weight of it all was too heavy. My father had set this whole thing in motion years ago, a chess game played from beyond the grave. And I was the pawn he'd chosen to become a queen. "How do I secure the claim?" I asked. "Come to my office in Wilmington," Arthur said. "Bring the map. Bring your identification. I'll have the paperwork ready. But Eleanor, be careful. Your brother is not going to take this lightly." I knew he was right. Richard had already lost his father, and now he was about to lose his inheritance too. He didn't see it that way, of course. He saw it as stealing. But I wasn't stealing. I was claiming what had been left for me. I packed my things, checked out of the motel, and drove. 4 hours to Delaware. I didn't stop for coffee. I didn't stop for food. I just drove, the map on the passenger seat beside me, my fingers gripping the steering wheel with white-knuckled intensity. Arthur Blakely's office was in a historic building on a quiet street lined with old elm trees. I walked in with the map in my hand and my heart in my throat. He was waiting for me, a tall man with a mop of white hair and kind eyes. "Eleanor," he said, shaking my hand. "You look just like your father. Same stubborn chin." I laughed. It was the first laugh I'd had in days. "Is that a compliment?" "It's a fact," he said. "Now, let's get to work." We spent the next 3 hours going over documents. The trust was complicated but solid. My father had set it up 20 years ago, in the middle of a business deal that had gone wrong. He'd hidden the mineral rights under layers of legal language, making them almost invisible to anyone who wasn't looking specifically for them. Richard had been too busy with the mansion to even notice the smaller parcels. Arthur handed me a thick folder. "These are the leases. The mineral rights are worth more than you think. If you're willing to wait, you could make a substantial amount of money." "I don't want to wait," I said. "I want to drill." Arthur raised an eyebrow. "That's a bold move. Drilling is expensive. Risky. There's no guarantee you'll strike oil." "I have $50,000, I said. "It's not much, but it's a start. I'll find investors. I'll take out loans. I'll do whatever it takes." Arthur studied me for a long moment. Then he smiled. "Your father told me you were stubborn." He wasn't wrong. He handed me a pen. I signed my name at the bottom of the last document, and in that moment, I felt something shift. The weight of my father's legacy settled onto my shoulders. Not as a burden. As a promise. I left the office with the map tucked under my arm and a plan forming in my mind. I was going to find investors. I was going to get the permits. I was going to drill. And I was going to make my brother regret ever taking that mansion. I was halfway back to my car when my phone buzzed. Richa RD's name flashed on the screen. I read at it for a full 10 seconds before I answered. Ellie, he said. His voice was tense. Strain beneath the surface. I need to know something. Did Dad ever talk to you about land outside the estate? I smiled. It was the first time I'd ever heard my brother sound nervous. Land, I said, innocent. Why would he talk to me about land? You know why, he said. I looked at the county records. There are 3 parcels. They're in Dad's name. But they're not part of the estate transfer. Do you know anything about that? I leaned against the car and looked up at the sky. It was blue and wide and open. I don't know what you're talking about, Richa Road, I said. But if I find anything, I'll let you know. I hung up before he could respond. And for the first time in a very long time, I laughed. Not a bitter laugh. Not a sad laugh. A real laugh, bubbling up from somewhere deep inside me. The game had begun. And this time, I wasn't playing defense. The next 6 months were the hardest of my life. I cashed out every savings account. I maxed out credit cards. I talked to 5 different banks, and each one turned me down. Too risky, they said. No collateral, they said. We can't approve a loan for mineral exploration based on a hand-drawn map. I wanted to scream at every single one of them. But I didn't. I just smiled, thanked them, and walked out. Then I went home to my little apartment in Chicago and read at the map spread across my kitchen table. 3 red X's. 3 chances. 3 rigs that were going to make me or break me. The $50,000 RS from my father was gone in the first 2 months. I used it to pay lawyers, to hire a land surveyor, to get the permits I needed from the county. Arthur Blakely helped me with the legal side, but I was on my own when it came to money. I worked 2 jobs. I drove for a ride-share company at night. I sold my grandmother's jewelry, the PRL necklace she'd left me when I was 16. I hated doing it, but I hated the thought of giving up even more. I root to hear whispers about Richa Road. He'd called the county clerk's office 3 times, demanding information about the parcels. He'd hired his own lawyer to look into the trust. He knew something was going on. He just didn't know what. And that made him angry. I got a call from Margaret one night late. Ellie, I'm not supposed to tell you this, she said, but your brother has been asking about mineral rights. He's getting close. You need to move faster. My stomach dropped. I'd been trying to find investors for weeks, but no one was interested. Oil was a gamble, and people didn't like gambles. Not when they could put their money in safer investments. Not when they could buy bonds and stocks and sleep easy at night. I sat in my kitchen, staring at the map, and I made a decision. If no one was going to invest in me, I was going to invest in myself. I had one asset left. One piece of collateral that Richa Road didn't know about. The mansion. I hated the thought of it. The mansion was the place where I'd grown up. The place where my mother had died. The place where my father had spent his final years, slowly fading away. But it was also worth millions. And Richa Road was about to lose it anyway. I called a real estate agent the next day. A woman named Donna, who'd been selling luxury properties in the area for 30 years. I told her I was interested in a private sale. I told her I knew a man who was about to inherit a mansion and needed cash fast. I didn't tell her the man was my brother. I didn't tell her I was planning to make him an offer he couldn't refuse. Donna was skeptical. Why would he sell? She asked. The Montgomery mansion is a Lanham RK. It's worth more than $10 million. He'd have to be desperate. He will be, I said. Give it time. 2 weeks later, I got the news. Richa RD's wife Pamela had filed for divorce. She'd taken half of everything they owned. The mansion's property taxes were overdue. The roof needed repairs. The foundation was cracking. Richa Road was bleeding money faster than he could earn it. I made my move. I called him on a Tuesday morning when I knew he'd be at his lowest. I want to buy the mansion, I said. He laughed. You don't have the money. I'll get it, I said. Name your price. He named a number. It was high, but not as high as it should have been. He was desperate. I could hear it in his voice. He needed the cash. He needed to pay off Pamela, to fix the roof, to keep the bank from foreclosing. He needed to sell, and he knew it. We negotiated for 3 weeks. I pretended I had other offers. I pretended I was walking away. He got nervous. He lowered the price. I came back with a counteroffer. Finally, we settled on a number that I could afford. It wasn't cheap. It was the most money I'd ever spent on anything. But I had a plan. I took out a mortgage. Not a bank mortgage. A private one arranged through a contact of Arthur Blakely. The interest rate was brutal. The terms were HRSH. But I didn't see a re. I was going to turn the mansion into a loan. I was going to use it to fund the rigs. The day I signed the papers, I felt something shift. The mansion was mine. My father's house. The place where I'd been erased. I'd bought it back, and I'd bought it back for less than it was worth. Richard Road had sold it to me out of desperation. He'd given me his birthright, just like that. I thought about calling him to gloat. I didn't. I just went to the mansion, walked through the empty rooms, and stood in the sunroom. The floorboards were still loose. The map was still in my pocket. Everything had come full circle. I route the drilling 3 months later. The first rig was on the site near the creek. It was a small operation, just a crew of 7 men and a lot of hope. I slept in a trailer on the property, waking up every morning at 4:30 to check the progress. I lost 10 pounds. I stopped sleeping more than 4 hours a night. I was exhausted, but I was also alive in a way I hadn't been in years. And then, on a Thursday afternoon in October, something happened. The drill bit hit something. The crew chief ran over to my trailer, his face flushed with excitement. "Ma'am, you need to come see this." I followed him to the rig. The drill was smoking. The ground was shaking. And then, like a geyser, the oil began to flow. It wasn't a gusher. It wasn't the kind of thing you see in movies, black gold spouting into the air. It was a steady, thick, dark stream. But it was oil. Real oil. My oil. I stood there, covered in dust and mud, watching it flow, and I root to cry. Not because I was sad. Because I was relieved. Because all of it had been worth it. Every sleepless night. Every rejection. Every moment of doubt. The second rig came online 3 months later. It was trickier, located on the floodplain near the swamp. The permits were a nightmare. The environmental regulations were worse. But we got it done. We built a platform, elevated above the water, and we root drilling. By then, word had spread. Richard Road had heard about the rigs. He called me late one night, drunk and angry, screaming about how I'd stolen his inheritance. I let him yell. I let him curse. Then I said, "I didn't steal anything, Richard Road. I found a map. You could have found it too. You were living in the mansion." The map was under the floorboards in the sunroom. All you had to do was look. There was a long pause. Then he said, "You're lying." "I'm not," I said. "Dad put it there. For me. He always knew I'd be the one to find it." Richard didn't say anything. He hung up. I didn't hear from him again for a long time. The third rig was the hardest. It was located on the edge of the swamp, in a spot that was almost impossible to reach. We had to build a road through the mud. We had to bring in specialized equipment. The cost was astronomical. But by then, I had money. The first 2 rigs were producing. I had investors calling me, begging to get in on the deal. I turned them all down. This was mine. All mine. We struck oil on the third rig on a rainy Tuesday in June. The crew cheered. I stood in the rain, soaking wet, and watched the oil flow. It wasn't as dramatic as the first time. But it was just as meaningful. I had done what my father had set me up to do. I had found the map. I had found the oil. I had built an empire from nothing. I sold the mansion a year later. Not because I needed the money. Because I didn't want it anymore. I didn't need a monument to my family's past. I had a future. A future that I'd built with my own hands. I bought a small house near the coast. A quiet place with a garden and a view of the water. I had a dog. I had a vegetable patch. I had everything I'd ever wanted, and none of it came from the Montgomery estate. But I kept the map. I framed it and hung it on the wall of my office. A reminder. Not of where I came from. Of where I'd been willing to go. The last time I saw Richard Road was at the county courthouse. He was there to file for bankruptcy. He was wearing an ill-fitting suit, and his face was lined with stress and failure. He didn't see me at first. He was too busy arguing with the clerk. I walked up to him. He looked up, and for a moment I saw the same smug, arrogant boy who had taken my dolls and buried them in the backyard. But that boy was gone, replaced by a man who had nothing left. Ellie, he said. His voice was quiet, defeated. You won. I didn't win, I said. I just didn't lose. He read at me. Then he laughed. It was a bitter, hollow sound. You're just like Dad. I know, I said. He made sure of it. I walked away. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. That was 3 hours ago. Today, I'm sitting in my office, looking at the framed map on the wall. The oil rigs are still producing. The money is still coming in. I've invested in renewable energy. I've root a Sholave ship fund for women in engineering. I've done good things with the legacy my father left me. But the thing I'm most proud of isn't the money. It's the fact that I looked. When everyone else would have walked away, I looked. I pried. I found. There's a saying my father used to use. It's not what you inherit that matters. It's what you do with what you're given. I never understood that until now. Richard took the mansion. He took the marble floors, the crystal chandeliers, the family name. But he didn't take the map. He didn't take the rigs. He didn't take the future that was waiting for me, just beneath the surface. Some inheritances are re-given. Some are reclaimed. And some are re-hidden under floorboards, waiting for someone brave enough to look. What's hidden in your life, waiting to be found. You brave enough to lift the boa. Drop a comment. Tell us your story. We read every single one. Because the biggest fortunes aren't always in the obvious places. Sometimes they're buried. Sometimes they're hidden. Sometimes they're waiting. And sometimes, if you're lucky, they're waiting for you. The money route coming in faster than I could count. By the end of the first year, the 3 rigs were producing enough oil to make me a millionaire. Not the kind of millionaire who buys yachts and private jets. The quiet kind. The kind who sleeps soundly at night and doesn't check her bank account every 5 minutes. I hired a team. Accountants. Lawyers. A foreman named Jake who had been drilling in Texas for 30 years and knew more about oil than I would ever learn. I trusted him completely. He was the kind of man who told you the truth even when it hurt, and I respected that. We expanded. We bought more land. We drilled more wells. The operation grew from 3 rigs to 12. I diversified into natural gas. I root a separate company for renewable energy because I wasn't stupid. I knew oil wouldn't last forever. But for now, it was paying the bills. It was building a foundation. I bought a house. Not a mansion. I didn't want a mansion. I bought a house on 40 acres, with a wrap-around porch and a barn that I converted into a workshop. I spent my weekends there, planting trees, fixing fences, learning how to be still. It was a life I'd never imagined for myself. A life that felt like mine. But I never forgot where I came from. I never forgot the night I pried up that floorboard and found the map. And I never forgot my brother. The last night Richard Road had moved to Florida. He'd used the money from the mansion sale to buy a condo near the beach, but he'd blown through it in less than a year, gambling he rode. Bad investments. A series of failed business ventures that left him with nothing but debts and regret. I didn't feel sorry for him. I didn't feel anything at all. He'd made his choices. I'd made mine. We were strangers now, bound only by blood and a shaw-red history that neither of us wanted to revisit. But that changed on a cold November morning when I got a call from a hospital in Miami. Ms. Montgomery. The voice on the other end was clipped and professional. This is St. Joseph's Hospital. We have you listed as the emergency contact for Richard Road, Montgomery. He's been admitted with a severe case of pneumonia. He's asking for you. I almost hung up. I almost said, he's not my problem. But something stopped me. Some stubborn, foolish party of me that still remembered the boy who used to chase me through the halls of the mansion, who taught me how to ride a bike, who held my hand at our mother's funeral. That I booked a flight that afternoon. The hospital was cold and sterile, the kind of place that smelled like antiseptic and despair. Richard Road was in a private room, hooked up to machines that beeped and hummed. He looked small in the bed. Frail. Nothing like the golden boy I remembered. He opened his eyes when I walked in. For a moment, he didn't recognize me. Then his face crumpled, and he sta root to cry. Ellie, he said. His voice was a rasp. I didn't think you'd come. Neither did I said. I sat down in the chair beside his bed. I didn't know what to do with my hands, so I folded them in my lap. The room was quiet except for the beeping of the machines. I'm sorry, he said. I know that doesn't mean anything. But I'm sorry. I didn't say anything. I didn't know what to say. He reached for my hand. I let him take it. His fingers were cold and bony, nothing like the strong hands that had once lifted me onto his shoulders when I was too small to see over a crowd. I wasted everything, he said. Dad gave me everything, and I wasted it. I was so busy being angry at you that I couldn't see what I was doing to myself. Richard, I'm not here for a confession. I know, he said. You're here because you're better than me. You always were. You were always the smart one. The brave one. The one who actually looked. I pulled my hand away. Don't do that. Don't rewrite history. I'm not rewriting anything, he said. I'm telling the truth. For the first time in my life, I'm telling the truth. He sta root coughing. It was a deep, wet cough that seemed to come from somewhere inside his soul. I reached for the call button, but he waved me off. Wait, he said. I need to tell you something. Something Dad told me. Before he died. I went still. My heart sta root to pound. The map, Richard said. I found out about the map. After you bought the mansion. I went back to the sunroom. I pried up the floorboy RDS. The box was gone. But there was something else. Something Dad left for me. I leaned four-way road. What? He coughed again. Rider this time. There was a letter. Tucked into the frame of the window. I didn't see it at first. Not until I was tearing the room apart, trying to figure out how you'd found the map. He closed his eyes, took a breath, and sta root talking. The letter was from Dad. He said he knew I would destroy the mansion. He knew I would gut it and sell it and forget about our family's history. He said he loved me, but he couldn't trust me with the important things. So he left them to you. I felt something twist inside me. That's not a secret, Richard. I already knew that. Wait, he said. There's more. He said there was another map. A different map. One that showed something even bigger than the oil rigs. He said he buried it in the backyard, under the old oak tree. The one where we used to play. I sta read at him. You're lying. I'm not lying, he said. I went to the backyard road. I dug under the oak tree. I found it. He reached for the drawer of the bedside table, fumbling with weak fingers. He pulled out a folded piece of paper and held it out to me. I took it. My hands were shaking. I unfolded it and looked at the hand-drawn lines. The familiar Arsha RP handwriting. It was my father's. I recognized it instantly. But this map wasn't the same as the first one. This one showed the mansion and the backyard and the river. But it also showed something else. A symbol I didn't recognize. A circle with a line through it. And under it, written in my father's seriful hand, a single word. Storage. I looked up at Richard. What is this? I don't know, he said. I never figured it out. I was too sick. Too tired. But I knew you would. You always figure things out. I folded the map and put it in my pocket. My mind was racing. The oak tree in the backyard. The place where Richard and I had played as children. I remembered that tree. It was ancient, red, covered in moss. We used to climb it, pretending it was a castle or a ship or a fortress. I hadn't thought about it in years. Thank you, I said, for giving me this. Richard smiled. It was a weak, tired smile. You're welcome, Ellie. I'm sorry I was such a terrible brother. I didn't answer. I didn't know how. I stayed with him for the rest of the afternoon. We didn't talk much. He drifted in and out of sleep. I watched the machines, the monitors, the slow rise and fall of his chest. I thought about our mother. I thought about our father. I thought about the mansion and the map and the oil rigs. All of it felt like a lifetime ago. I left when the nurses came to change his form. I told him I'd come back tomorrow. He nodded, already half asleep. I didn't go straight to the mansion. I went back to my hotel, spread the new map out on the bed, and studied it. The oak tree was in the same place I remembered, near the edge of the property, just beyond the vegetable garden that our mother had loved. The symbol was unfamiliar. A circle with a line through it. It looked like a target. Or a compass. I called Arthur Blakely that night. He answered on the first ring. Eleanor, he said. It's late. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong, I said. I just found something. A new map. My father left it for Richa Road. But Richa Road gave it to me. Arthur was quiet for a moment. Then he said, what kind of map? I described it to him. The symbol. The word storage. The location under the oak tree. Arthur was silent for a long time. Then he said, Eleanor, your father was a very careful man. He didn't do things by accident. If he left a map, it was for a reason. You need to go back to the mansion. You need to dig under that tree. Dig for what? I don't know, Arthur said. But I have a feeling it's something your father wanted you to find. I slept fitfully that night. I dreamed of the oak tree, its branches reaching toward the sky like arms. I dreamed of my father, standing underneath it, smiling. I dreamed of a hole in the ground, deep and dark and full of secrets. I drove to the mansion the next morning. It was strange, pulling up to the gates. The place looked different now. Empty. Abandoned. The windows were boarded up, and the RD was overgrown with weeds. I hadn't been there since I'd sold it. I didn't recognize it. But I found the oak tree. It was still there, older and red, but still standing. I parked my car and walked across the lawn. The grass was knee-high, wet with dew. The tree loomed above me, its branches spread wide like a cathedral. I found the spot where Richa Road had dug. The EARTH was loose, recently disturbed. I knelt down and root digging with my hands. The soil was cold and damp. I dug deeper, my fingers numb with effort, until I hit something. Road. It was a box. A metal box, smaller than the one I'd found in the sunroom, but just as old. I pulled it out of the ground and brushed off the dirt. I opened it. Inside was a stack of papers. Yellowed, brittle, written in my father's hand. I root reading, and my breath caught in my throat. The papers were ledgers. Detailed accounts of an investment that my father had made decades ago. Not in land. Not in oil. In something else. Something I'd never heard him mention. A technology company. A startup that had been founded by a friend of his, a man named Dr. Samuel Gray. The company had developed a new kind of energy storage. A battery that could hold power for months, maybe years. The technology was ahead of its time. It was revolutionary. My father had invested heavily. But the company had failed. The investors had pulled out. Dr. Gray had died in a car accident, and the technology had been buried. It was too risky. Too expensive. Too far ahead of its time. But my father had saved the patents. He'd saved the blueprints. He'd hidden them in the box under the oak tree, waiting for someone to find them. Waiting for someone who had the resources and the determination to bring them back to life. I sat there in the grass, the papers spread around me, and I laughed. I laughed until my sides ached and tears streamed down my face. My father had left me the oil rigs. But he'd also left me something bigger. Something that could change the world. Something that could make the oil rigs look like pocket change. I called Arthur Blakely from my car. I found it, I said. I found the box. What was in it? He asked. Everything, I said. The future. I flew to California the next week. The patents were real. The blueprints were real. Dr. Samuel Gray's technology had been buried for 20 years, but it was still viable, still ahead of its time. I spent 3 months meeting with engineers, with venture capitalists, with lawyers who specialized in intellectual property. I sold 2 of the oil rigs to fund the initial research. I mortgaged the farmhouse. I put everything I had into this one thing. Everyone told me I was crazy. Batteries are a dead end, they said. Solar, our storage isn't profitable, they said. You're throwing your money away. I didn't listen. I'd learned something from my father. I'd learned that sometimes the biggest opportunities are the ones everyone else ignores. The first prototype was built in a rented warehouse in San Jose. It was ugly and clunky and took up half the floor space. But it worked. It stored energy from solar, our panels, and held it for months without losing a single percentage point of charge. I watched the engineers run the tests, and I felt the same rush I'd felt when the oil first sta route flowing from the rig. We refined it. We made it smaller, lighter, more efficient. We filed new patents. We built a second prototype, then a third. By the end of the second year, we had a product that was ready for the market. I named the company Greystone Energy, a tribute to Dr. Gray and to the oak tree where my father had hidden the blueprints. The launch was a success. Within 6 months, we had contracts with 3 major utility companies. Within a year, we were profitable. Within 2 years, we were the fastest-growing energy storage company in the country. The money was obscene. I didn't know what to do with it at first. I bought back the mansion. I had it restored, not as a home, but as a museum. A place where people could come and see the history of the Montgomery family. I donated the oak tree to the county, had it protected as a landmark. I wanted people to remember where it all sta root. But I didn't move back. I kept the farmhouse. I kept my vegetable patch. I kept my dog. I kept the quiet life that had saved me. Richard died 6 months after I sta root Greystone. He never got to see what I built. But I like to think he would have been proud. Or at least, he would have been less angry. I visited him in the hospital the week before he passed. He was weaker than ever, barely able to speak. But he opened his eyes when I walked in, and he smiled. You did it, he whispered. I knew you would. I sat beside him and took his hand. I used the map you gave me. I know, he said. I saw it on the news. Greystone Energy. You named it after the tree. I nodded. I had to. He squeezed my hand. It was a squeeze, just a faint pressure. I'm proud of you, Ellie. I should have said it a long time ago. I didn't know what to say. I'd spent so many years hating him, resenting him, wanting to prove him wrong. But now, in this room, with the machines beeping and the light fading from his eyes, all of that seemed so small. Thank you, I said. For giving me the map. For trusting me. He closed his eyes. You were always the one who looked. I was the one who took things. You were the one who found them. He died 3 days later. I was the only one at the funeral. I went back to the mansion after the service. It was empty, still being restored, but I walked through the rooms anyway. I went to the sunroom, stood in the middle of the floor, and listened to the house settle around me. I thought about all the things my father had hidden. The map under the floorboards. The box under the oak tree. The patents, the blueprints, the technology that had changed my life. He had hidden them all, waiting for someone to find them. Waiting for me. I knelt down and touched the spot where I'd pried up the floorboard road. It had been repaired now, the wood sealed and polished. But I could still feel it. The moment of discovery. The moment when everything changed. I went to the backyard and stood under the oak tree. It was older now, red and huge. I placed my hand on its trunk and felt its rough bark. This tree had held my father's secrets for decades. It had held them until I was ready. I don't believe in luck. I don't believe in fate. I believe in choices. My father made a choice to hide the map. He made a choice to leave the box under the tree. He made a choice to trust me, even when he couldn't say it out loud. And I made a choice. I chose to look. I chose to pry. I chose to fight for what was mine. That's the thing about hidden treasures. They don't come to you. You have to go to them. You have to be willing to get your hands dirty, to dig in the mud, to sleep in a trailer, to lose sleep and money and pride. You have to be willing to fail. I've thought about that a lot over the hours. About failure and fear and the people who let them stop them. Richard was like that. He was afraid of losing the mansion, so he held onto it too tightly. He was afraid of being less than our father, so he tried to be everything at once. He was afraid of failure, so he never really tried at all. I was afraid too. But I was more afraid of letting someone else write my story. Greystone Energy is a Fortune 500 company now. I stepped down as C3 hours ago. I'm not built for boardrooms and quarterly reports. I'm built for discovery. For that moment when the floorboard gives and the light shines on something new. I spend my time now investing in other people's hidden maps. I fund startups that are too risky for traditional investors. I give scholarships to girls who want to study engineering. I pay it forward, the way my father paid it forward to me. The oil rigs are still producing. I never sold the third one. I couldn't bring myself to do it. It reminds me of who I was, who I had to become. I keep a photograph of it in my office, right next to the framed map. Sometimes I go back to the mansion. I walk through the rooms and I remember the reading of the will, the moment I was erased, the moment I decided to fight back. I remember standing in the library, listening to Mr. Connolly read the words that should have broken me. I remember the click of my heels on the marbly floor. I remember thinking that I had nothing left. But I did have something. I had the will to keep going. I had the stubbornness that my father passed down to me. I had the courage to look where nobody else was looking. That's my story. It's not a fairy tale. There's no magic wand, no happy ending that fell into my lap. I worked for everything I got. I made sacrifices. I cried in the dark. I wanted to give up over and over again. But I didn't. Because somewhere in the back of my mind, I could hear my father's voice. The same voice that had taught me how to read a balance sheet. The same voice that had told me to make my own way in the world. The world belongs to the people who are willing to look, he used to say. The rest of them just live in it. I didn't understand that when I was young. I thought he was talking about opportunity. I thought he was talking about business deals and investments. But now I know he was talking about something deeper. He was talking about finding your place, claiming your space, refusing to be erased. So if you're sitting there right now, listening to this story, wondering if you have what it takes to change your life, I want you to think about this. What's hidden in your life, what's buried under the floorboards, waiting to be found, what's been there all along, just out of sight, just out of reach. Don't wait for permission. Don't wait for someone else to hand it to you. Go find it yourself. Pry up the boa road, dig under the tree. Take the risk. Fail, if you have to. But at least fail trying. Because the worst thing you can do isn't to fail. The worst thing you can do is to never look at all. I'm Ellie Montgomery. I found a map under the floorboards. I found 3 oil rigs. I built an empire from a piece of paper and a broken fingernail. And I did it all because I was willing to look. Subscribe to this channel. Drop a comment. Tell us your story. We read every single one. Your map is out there. Go find it.